Cocktail Sessions, educational and inspirational talks from experienced startup founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders.
All right. They said that they wanted to see you. All right, so first off, thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
You're a busy guy, and we're getting
high.
some feedback. Somebody help us with that? Okay.
All right, I'll just keep talking so you can adjust.
There you go.
There we go. Perfect.
What did you have for breakfast this morning?
Coffee.
That's it?
Yes.
That happens
Very
to me
odd.
sometimes, and I'm crazy when that happens. Like,
I never eat breakfast, really.
really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I sort of think it's a farce that it kind of kicks you off for the day. It's all about, there's a total number of calories that you eat in a day.
Right.
And if you want to eat 2,400 calories in 1 hour versus 24 hours with 100 calories each, or 3 hours with 800 calories each, it's not that different.
So wait a minute. So it's not. You don't think it's the foundation to your day then at all? Because that's what the old tale is, that it's like.
I think it's like Valentine's Day, which is a made-up artificial holiday for people to go and monetize against.
Wow.
Like I think breakfast is a made-up meal for people to go and monetize against.
Okay. So I think your mic's ready to go now. We've got
All right.
that finished up. Okay. So before we get started, obviously this is a fireside chat, so we've got to get the fire out. Do that quickly.
Oh, good. Justin Thorpe will be so happy.
He will be. So, as we're doing this, because it takes a second technically, there we go.
Clarification, on weekends I do eat breakfast because that's fantastic.
Yeah. So, do you like brunch then? Brunch.
I love brunch.
I love brunch.
Yeah. But I just do my 2,400 calories then.
Right.
As
So
opposed
it's really like
to,
lunch, like a big lunch, right?
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
All right.
Sometimes it's like all 3 meals.
So enough about breakfast and brunch. We've covered that.
It's captivating.
How do you feel about lunch? No, I'm kidding. Okay, let's go. Let's kind of dive into it. Let's talk about. We're going to talk about you for a little while, and then kind of get the base, the foundation, if you will, of like it'll be like our breakfast for Tim, about what you've been up to and where you've been, and then kind of dive into LivingSocial. So let's talk about you for a little bit. You're from the area?
I'm from Minnesota originally.
Minnesotan?
Yes.
Wow, my family's from up there too.
All right.
What part?
The Twin Cities area.
Nice. Okay. Cool. So
The cold part?
The cold part. Yeah, it's cold all the time, pretty much. So what got you out to DC and got you started here? You went to Georgetown, is that right?
Yeah, I went to Georgetown and then really never left. I like the city, I like the environment, and I got a job at AOL right out of school, and so that kind of propelled me into the consumer tech space.
Okay. What were you doing at AOL?
I was. They didn't oftentimes hire people I was in product management. They didn't hire people directly out of school in product management very regularly. So I literally think they created a new rung on the org chart because I was like an associate junior product manager, which like when you did the search in their company intranet, like you couldn't find anybody else with that title. So
It's like an assistant regional manager, or assistant to the regional manager. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it was something like that, and I worked on a browser product that they had, and then I actually worked on a sharing product for favorites. So you could kind of take your favorites and stored links with you.
Wow, that's really ironic. I actually worked on that project at AOL after you left.
Oh, all right. Well, sorry.
And it brought me from the West here. So, no, we rebuilt it, but that's really funny. Favorites just won't go away.
No, they won't.
So you were at AOL, and then you went to Revolution Health. Is that
I went
right?
to Revolution Health. Yeah.
And you were not doing favorites there. What were you up to?
No. I started off as a product manager, and I ultimately ended up running the product and design team, and it was really around. That was a very interesting concept of get a bunch of smart people, have it very well funded, and take a space that everybody thinks is reasonably screwed up and see what can happen.
Mm-hmm. What happened?
A lot of things happened. There's a full nother tech cocktail session.
Okay, we don't have to talk about that, but I did want to find out what did you from these two experiences, how did it shape your career, like going forward?
Yeah, I think a lot of the career has still been learning as we go, because I worked at AOL for a little less than 2 years, and I worked at Revolution for a little less than 2 years, and I've now been at LivingSocial for 6.5 years. So, but you work at AOL at a very large company, and you understand how processes at scale work. You understand what's easy to do, what's hard to do. And then at Revolution, I joined when it was about 50 people or so, and it grew to about 250. So I had some picture into scaling. And and what not to do when you scale, and what areas to focus on. And so I think those are kind of 2 key takeaways.
That makes sense. And so you came out of that and you decided, boy, I want to start an app development shop.
It was more complicated, but yet more simple than that, which was I and a few other guys who were all at Revolution Health, we were kind of a core of the product development unit there. We in May of 2007, you may remember it when Facebook opened up their platform so third parties could go build apps into it.
Right.
And the sheep throwing era, and it was much more of
That was a fun era though.
It was really a realization of you can acquire users faster and cheaper than you ever could in the history of the web.
Wow.
And it sort of kicked something off where we really wanted to figure out, how can we take advantage of that? Because it seems like there's a paradigm shift in how people will interact and how consumers will go and discover new products. So that was the impetus. And so we didn't know what we were going to do other than it was just, wow, there's going to be this new fire hose of traffic. And if you can figure out how to do something on it,
that's exciting. I mean, at that time, it was really a big deal.
It was.
And so you started a company.
We did.
What was it called?
It was called Hungry Machine, which some of you may have heard, and it was really I wasn't the one that came up with the name of it. One of the other guys did, but ultimately we liked it because we didn't know what we were going to do, but we wanted it to be representative of our mentality, and so we were literally kind of tried to name the company after our mentality.
So stay hungry.
Yeah, and kind of try and be machines about it, and just don't get too high with the highs, too low with the lows, and be able to just kind of crank stuff out.
That makes sense. And so Hungry Machine, how did that get you where you are as far as LivingSocial? Can you tell us a little bit more of how that maybe morphed you to this?
Yeah, so we've had really 3 business models. When we first started, we didn't know what we were going to go and do. So we were experimenting with some. We all quit our jobs. Everybody wrote a small but yet painful, based on our salary levels at that point in time, check into the business to start it. And we didn't have any outside funding at all. And so we basically said, look, we're going to go and try and get some consulting gigs, and go build apps for people, and spend half of our time doing that, half of our time building our own products. And so we actually built a reasonably successful consulting business. Within about 6 months or so, we actually had an MSA, or Master Services Agreement, with Disney to go build apps for ESPN and for a lot of their properties. We'd built some pretty popular. Actually, my favorite one is for AMC. We built an app for Breaking Bad before it actually. So it launched in 2007. Wow. So I think I was one of the very first people to actually see the first episode, because they sent it to us in advance to go splice up video clips as part of the app. So, so we did that, and suddenly we found ourselves having a consulting business, and it was sort of a did we want this from a lifestyle?
Yeah. Did you like that? Is that something that you aspired to, or?
It wasn't bad, but I think there were 2 things. One, it wasn't really necessarily the same type of creative outlet that we wanted to go after. It wasn't taking advantage of the opportunity in the way that we had thought about it. And second is we were going for something bigger. To some degree, we wanted to lean over and go for the brass ring, and if it if we hit it, so be it, and if we didn't, well, then we'd fall. So it was more of a means to an end. But suddenly we found ourselves with a decent sized business, and it's painful to cut off a decent sized business.
Especially when you initially had been writing checks to the business. And
even then we paid ourselves $2,000 distributions whenever we felt like we could.
To keep it going,
to kind of pay rent and that sort of thing. But most of the money we made, we actually put back in to go and try and hire people and make it them feel like we could actually make payroll for a while.
So you're building apps for these big brands, and that's a time when people just didn't know Facebook, didn't know what to do there. So you were taking advantage of that, almost as if back in the day when people were building HTML pages for the web. Right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so you saw that, you were doing that, and you were taking advantage of it. What was that spark that then you realized, wow, this is great, but I kind of want to do this other thing?
It was really, we built a series of apps. The first one was called Visual Bookshelf, and it was popular. Where you could go and see what your friends were reading. You could write reviews. They could see what you were reading. And that started to take off, and actually it got a lot of users, but it actually got engaged users. It had people that were going to it regularly, so they weren't just throwing a sheep once and then not again. And so when we had that, we started to build it out and said, hey, all right, what else could we do this around? So we built a movies app. We built a
beer app, I think, right?
We built a beer app. Yeah. Where did people like to spend their time? Restaurants. We actually, for some period of time, were getting more reviews per day within our app and Facebook than Yelp was getting on restaurants. Now they're much bigger now than they were then.
Right.
But we started to see some engagement around it and said, hey, we might actually be able to turn this into a business. And that's when we started to actually think about raising money.
Wow. So numbers-wise, I know that it's all scaled, but back then, what were good numbers like for those types of apps?
Oh, those apps were probably, they probably were in the 5 to 10 million monthly uniques. We ended up spinning some other apps off of that were, got to 40, 50, 60 million monthly uniques. Wow. So at one point in time, we were the largest app developer on Facebook, and we had something called Pick Your Five. Yeah,
that was a big one.
Which got a lot of usage on it, and really kind of shows you humanity a little bit to see what people actually pick. And it was very, very, very scary for the interns that were doing moderation.
That's funny. So you've got all this now, these users and this data, right? So what was the, I guess the impetus to say, okay, now we've got all this stuff, let's go create another totally different business?
Yeah, it was. So I think there were two things. One, it's funny. I randomly was looking through a board deck from October of 2008 the other day, which is very scary. And in that board deck, it talked about how Facebook was making a lot of platform changes that were very, very hard to be able to steadily and predictably go and build a business off of.
Right.
And I think that was actually something where we said, hey, we need to look at, if you're building on top of a platform, how confident are you? How much you want to be tied to that?
Right.
And so we really thought, how can we take this traffic and these users and migrate it to something else? And so we said, Facebook tells you where people live. You generally knew they lived in the DC area. And they were telling us what they like to do, what they like to read, what restaurants they like to go to. And we thought, can we do something with that?
So who came up with that?
So we started to look at kind of concepts that were out there. And we bought a little company that was called Buy Your Friend a Drink.
Sounds like a good idea.
Right. And the way it worked was that there were liquor companies would go and say, hey, we want people to go try, a Heineken, and then they would go and this company would go and try and get people to go into a bar, and they would message out with a newsletter or something like that to go into a bar and then go and Heineken would pay for it and you get a free drink.
Yeah.
So it's trying to send people from the web into a local business.
Right. So online to offline. You noticed that.
So it's online to offline.
Yep.
And we had some initial traction there, and then but the business model around that was reliant on getting Heineken to go and cut a $500,000 check, which
they don't want to do every day.
Exactly. So we started to kind of migrate and say, hey, can we do this in other categories? This company called Groupon came on our radar, and we said, oh, they're playing in the very, very similar space to what we're doing, and we sort of just kind of continued to hone in from there.
But you had a different angle, right? Like with the social angle of sharing. Like, how did that come about? Because they didn't do anything where you shared a certain amount of times and you actually get the deal for free or anything like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was really how, and I think to some degree we've gotten away from this and need to get more at this, but it is how do you leverage the fact that you have social platforms out there to go and drive commerce in a way that previously you couldn't have. And so we had something called Me+3, where if you bought it and then you got 3 people to buy it, then yours would be free. And I actually still think there can be an explosion of product development that can occur off of that type of concept right now.
So you built these apps, got a lot of traction, got a lot of data, and then went to get funded, basically. That was
so we got funded before we had moved to more of a local commerce model. But we had built up this visual bookshelf, et cetera, and had enough traction where we were able to convince somebody to go give us money for some period.
And that first investment was friends and family, something like that?
No. We sort of had made our seed round, if you will, with the consulting business, and so we went for a Series A. We did a $5 million Series A with Growtech and Revolution, so both DC-based investors, and that kind of gives you a runway where one of the things we were looking for is we wanted at least 18 months. And so that kind of was what we looked at from a round size standpoint.
And they, at that point, were they clear on the direction, or did you have to change direction with them?
At that point, it was all around, we're going to be the largest book community and restaurant community and everything on the web. So we totally ended up changing.
So how was that conversation?
It was a... Moving from that was a little easier than you would expect because there hadn't been able to dig enough holes from a business standpoint, so from a pure business model. So it wasn't like we were turning off this huge spigot of revenue.
Right.
But what was harder is that the Pick Your Five world, we got so much traffic on that you could throw in AdSense, you could throw in various different ad networks at that point in time, and I think we peaked at about. The last month before we kind of definitively shifted to the local model, we did about 1.1 million in revenue, about 850,000 in profit in that month.
Wow.
And then the next month we basically said, kaputs.
Right. That's a big kaput.
So it is. I mean, we were like 11 people or 12 people or something at that point. So that was the much harder decision. But we saw. I mean, we could have run that as an annuity, but we saw the writing on the wall of that wasn't going to be a business for a couple of years. And so we could have basically said, look, we're going to try and just suck out as much profit as we can. But we thought that would. The opportunity cost of missing the other opportunity where we saw things was too great.
Right. So you mentioned Groupon, and you kind of shifted that direction. How much did you focus on competing with Groupon as you kind of grew? And I guess secondarily, was that helpful or harmful to have that kind of a competitor in the space?
You pay attention to what people are doing, so you should learn from your competition and seeing what's happening. I think it was for a while the company was helpful. I mean, it's something to kind of galvanizes people, and you pay very, very good attention to what's going on. It can kind of drive things. But I think over time, you have to let that evolve. Like that can be an internal rallying cry to some degree. But you have to evolve from match play to playing the course, and I think that the company has shifted at this point in time to that.
Okay, so you're basically used it as a rally cry for a while, and this is 2000. Let's put ourselves back in July 2008 when you announced that $5 million in funding. They're out there, you're out there, you're building up this.
So that was 2009.
Oh, 2009. I'm sorry.
When we actually.
The
first deal we did was July 27, 2009.
Wow. Okay, good memory.
Zengo. We sold 53, of which I bought 7.
That's funny. All right, so in that time period, let's say you're building this business, you've got investors, you then eventually let's move ahead a little bit. You go over and you get another round of funding. I mean, at this point, how much did you raise in 2009? Probably like. You were done with that $5 million.
We did a round of funding. Our next round of funding. So in June of 2008, we did a $5 million round, and then December of 2009, we did a roughly $5 or $5.5 million round.
And then about a year later, you did about a $44 million round. Is that about right?
No, very, very soon after. We did in about February. We did what I believe was we did a round in February that was about 25 million. Then we did another round about 2 months later that was, I think, about 15 million.
So basically, what I'm getting at is you were constantly raising money.
For a long time actually. And it was largely driven by we made a bet in that December 2009 round that we launched our first deal in the end of July. So basically, we'd had August, September, October, November. We'd had 4 months worth of data.
Right.
But frankly, we didn't, and the data looked great. It was basically give me $1 and I can turn it into $2.
That's great.
And that seems like good math. And so the actual, could we do it in more than one market? Could we get enough scale where the data people would believe it? And so really what we did is we did an internal round because it was the only thing that we could do in that short a period of time.
Right.
And said, look, we're going to do this, and then we're going to go and spend it all on user acquisition.
Yeah.
And
didn't you almost run out? I think I heard
I mean, it was yes and no. To some degree, that was the bet. It was either going to work, in which case we would be able to parlay it into a substantial capital raise at a much higher valuation
with all
in
that
a pretty
data.
short period of time.
Yeah.
With that data and the users and the revenue trends that we were seeing.
Right.
Or it wasn't, in which case, we had a whole different scenario to go and worry about. So. So we took our burn basically to when we were going to go and raise. I mean, I think it was like 6 weeks of, and we could have turned down the marketing spend and made things go a little longer. But at expenditures when we were actually raising in early 2010, I think we had like 6 weeks of runway or something.
Wow, 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Was that terrifying, or were you confident?
Yeah.
Did you sleep at night?
I believed in the board and the people in the company believed in what we were doing, that this would work, that this was a model and a value proposition that resonated, but we had to get enough data in order to get other people to believe it and buy in. Right. So I think nervous isn't necessarily the right word because we were confident, but I think we were. We were not wanting to be wrong. I guess that's probably the for a lot of reasons, that's probably the best way to put it.
Okay, so by 2010, you'd raised $45 million. That's a lot of capital. Up to date, I may be totally wrong here, but I think you've raised like $924 million.
That's a little wrong, but it's we've raised well into we've raised well into the hundreds
range
of millions of dollars. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So that's interesting. I mean, from just a numbers perspective, like sitting at a table where you're saying, okay, let's say our company, I'm going to raise almost $1 billion at this point. What does that put LivingSocial at? Like almost $10 billion? I don't know. Like that's a lot of money. Like that's worth a lot. And I know it's on paper everything. How does that feel? I guess is my question.
Yeah, I mean so I guess I never really looked at it that way. It's you're. Raising money is a means to an end and not a success in and of itself.
Right.
And because it allows you to go and progress in the business. But don't get me wrong, you're giving things up. You are diluting yourself of your future value, right? So you have to think that the pie is going to grow enough to offset that. But the other thing that I think I always had a very, very different view on valuations, which is it's not how much you were, that is not how much you are worth, because nobody is offering to go, somebody's offering to buy a small piece of the company for that amount. Nobody is offering to buy
the whole thing,
the whole company for a certain amount. And really, if you're an investor, at least how I think about it is let's just use, Pinterest as an example. So Pinterest raised at a $2.5 billion valuation, I think is what they raised at before. And I was talking with somebody who actually was involved in the round, but ended up not actually doing the round. But their calculus on it was at $2.5 billion. How I viewed it is, are they worth $2.5 billion? No, they're not worth $2.5 billion. But do I think that there's a greater than 1 in 40 chance that they can be worth $100 billion?
Right.
And that's how they do the calculus on valuation. So kind of a roundabout way of thinking about. I never really contextualize it in the way that you describe.
Okay, but still, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a tremendous amount of capital. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so now you've got all this capital. You're rising. You're building this company very quickly. You're scaling, you're building, you're rolling it out, you're building a team. I heard through, friends and of LivingSocial that you were like literally on a jet trying to meet people all over the country and interview them 24/7 as you scale. Like it was pretty tireless stuff.
Yeah, it was hard. It was the January 1st, 2010. We were about 35 people. January 1st, 2011, we were about 600, and January 1st, 2012, we were about 4,000.
Wow.
So that is a incredible amount of operational work that is required just to literally do everything, like get people onboarded into HR systems, like all of that sort of thing, it sounds sexy. It's not. It is hard. It is painful. You haven't built up the communication infrastructure to manage thousands of people. You're inherently dealing with time zones. You're trying to figure out how do you have office space where you can go and do things, and so it's difficult.
So that's the part that isn't glamorized, more or less. And so, what would your advice be to anybody that's starting up that wants to like do this, and maybe doesn't realize that part of it?
Yeah, I mean, so the perfect business is one that doesn't raise a lot of capital and doesn't hire employees before it's operationally ready to go and take them on. Like a lot of times people glamorize the number of employees you have and the amount of capital that gets raised.
Yeah.
And actually, I think it's the inverse. It's the perfect business is one that doesn't raise capital because you're not diluting yourself of your most precious asset as a business, which is your ownership stake, and is one that doesn't hire employees before it is operationally ready to, because the tax and the cost on that is really expensive.
Right. So how did you get that infrastructure in place? I mean, it sounds like it was a lot of work.
I mean, we're still trying to this day.
Right.
I mean, it takes a long time. It's a difficult thing to do, and so, but I think we thought this was a big space, and so we knew the strategy that we were doing would ultimately have some degree of collateral damage. We were moving too fast, where we knew that we were going to get some things wrong. Okay. And that's a little uncomfortable when you're doing it, but the downside of that was if you didn't move fast enough, which a lot of people in the space didn't do, then you weren't going to be around. You weren't going to make it through that chute, make it through that tunnel. And I think you saw the companies that were more aggressive ended up making it through that tunnel.
Right. And in doing so, I mean, you scaled to 27 countries. Pretty impressive. How did that affect like the culture, of the company? From a couple guys to 35 to 600 to 4,000, like that's a huge change in culture.
Yeah, it's little things that you don't think about, like just time zones, for example.
Pesky time zones.
How much travel can become part of your expenditure.
Right.
And then things on you used to be able to have an entire functioning nucleus of a team, together to you need entire areas for functions of team. And if it really I think that the hardest thing that we have had to deal with, and we still struggle with it, and we're trying to get better, bless you, was that that communication infrastructure is really, really hard. When you're 35 people, if you want to change a strategy, you pull everybody into the room and you say, we used to be doing this, and this wasn't working, or this was working but not well enough, and we see better opportunities, so now we're going to start doing this. Right. And here's how we're going to do it. Okay, any questions? And you can't do that when you can't put everybody in a room anymore.
At the same time,
And so much of our time and effort and focus really is we're still a giant startup. We don't have everything figured out yet, and so trying to make sure the employee base understands why we're electing to do things and explaining certain things is it's a hugely important task, and one that we take very seriously. Spend a lot of time doing.
So you mentioned you're still a startup. How do you maintain that startup kind of feel, in a big organization? I mean, you're a big company now.
Yeah, and I guess it all depends on your definition of a startup. But right. I tend to think, if you feel like you don't have everything figured out yet, you're still kind of a startup, right?
Right.
And so that's sort of the litmus test that I use. But it's hard. I mean, you do change how you think about operating, and you can't deny the fact that you're a larger company.
Right.
But I think it's really important thinking about your hiring process. Why are people joining? Do people think?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think has been really important for us to, and we haven't always gotten it right, but when people are joining LivingSocial, are they do they want to join a 4,000 person company? Or do they want to join a company that is still shifting and trying to figure out, what works, what doesn't work? Right. And sometimes those things aren't compatible. And so I think that we've gotten increasingly upfront with letting people know, like, look, this is different than working at AT&T, right? It is very different in its nature. So
our fire's back.
Another log on.
Yeah, another log on there.
So I think just being very upfront with that and making that part of your hiring process as much as you can has been something important.
Okay, then how do you keep, as you grow, like I've heard that you do like some things internally, like there's some entrepreneurship going on. Is that still happening? Like where you've got people just kind of doing projects and things like that, or has that kind of gone away as you've grown?
Yeah, I hope so. I hope I don't know about all of it.
Right.
We have a product that is going to kind of soft launch in the next couple of days.
Oh, wow.
That actually started out of just a small team, about 2 or 3 people that were like, hey, I think that we can do this. I think we can do this well, and that sort of germinated to things.
Can you give us a hint of what that might be like? Just for this audience. We won't tell anyone.
Right.
There's no other.
Expanding our ability to be a marketing platform for people.
Expanding your ability to be a marketing platform for other people?
No, for businesses.
Businesses.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay.
But I think that's, I hope that happens. But at the same point in time, you need people working on the things that we think are going to drive the business. So
right.
so it's a balance.
Interesting. Okay. So, we talked about a little bit about your culture, and we didn't touch as much on motivation. We can talk about that in a little bit, but I want to ask a few more questions, and I want to open up to the audience here because they're ready. I can feel it. Got the questions ready to go. Okay, so we talked a little bit about scaling into these countries. As you kind of went into these different countries, what was your attitude towards like copycats in those countries and like versus other countries? Because you've got to expand. You've acquired some companies. Just want to get your sense of like what that felt like.
Yeah, I mean, I am. I think people have different definitions of innovation, and I think that seizing a business opportunity is inherently not a bad thing to do. So companies elsewhere that are going and trying to go and build a business because they see it working somewhere else, kind of like, think back to frontier days in the U.S. You saw somebody go to a frontier town and go in the gold rush, and then so you went to a different frontier town to go try and get the gold rush. Like, is that bad? No.
Right.
I think if people can go, I think it comes down to do you have good people that have smart business acumen that can try and build something sustainable, and if that's the case, well then interested in figuring out, can we work together, and if you don't meet that criteria, then less interested.
Okay, in those countries, did you have to adapt your culture, and how you manage basically to their culture? Did you have to model your company a little differently?
Yeah, you change things, right? There's a centralized team in market that tended to deal with the customers. So on the sales side, on the operational side, you had people in market. But fundamentally, there are differences among people, and there are small changes. But what we're all trying to do every day is go and drive customers for our merchants, and that concept doesn't need to be adapted from country to country. So as long as everybody understands that, you have that guiding light, and it's sort of a lot of other things work themselves out.
Right. So keeping it simple, more or less.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any advice you'd offer anybody on, any of the folks here on scaling, just in general? If you had to give one piece of advice that you've learned along the way.
Yeah, I think if you think it's going to be if you think it's going to be fun, then recalibrate. And I say that somewhat in jest, but there, things are not going to work, and you're going to get frustrated by that, and that's okay. It is the exception, not the rule, that just goes totally, up into the right all the time. And when you're scaling, you're gonna break glass, and be okay with that. And the other thing I would say is be as upfront as you can with your employee base about the fact that we're going to screw up. We don't know where we're going to screw up. Nobody is intentionally trying to screw up. But it's going to happen. And when you scale, the likelihood of that occurring and somebody thinking that another group within the company is an idiot because they just don't know them as much anymore increases and is higher. So just as much as you can be upfront with that, I think that goes a long way.
Okay. That makes sense. We talked about scaling. We talked about your culture and everything. Let's talk a little bit about, you just mentioned the ups and downs. Like you just explained it. Like be okay with that. So let's talk a little bit about that huge growth, and you've hit ups and downs along the way. You've had layoffs. You've had there was a whole data compromise situation. There was a whole spin around like the DC government helping you guys be here and everything, and there was a whole pushback about tax credits, things like that. So I don't want to dive into the weeds on every single one of them, but I kind of wanted to talk about...
By all means, though.
Yeah, if you want to, we can. That could be a whole nother session. All right, so what have you learned along the way, just summarizing all those in general, what have you learned along the way about those different growing pains, and what would you offer as advice to folks if you hit those?
I think it sort of is a realism that there's a glamorization of startups as being sexy,
right?
And they're hard work, and there are things that go wrong. It's just like any business that's out there. It's one of the 14,000 restaurants that have opened up on 14th Street that are trying to figure out how to go and make things work, right? So like that's a big piece of things, and one of the things that I've tried to do, and it was very difficult for a period of time, is because I think a lot of the coverage of our space, made it out to be, better than the business in the category actually was, and then
right.
I think it swung back and was more tragic.
Yeah, Daily Deals was a hot space for a while, and you guys in Groupon were taking the spotlight, and then there was a backlash.
Sure.
In that whole space.
And I think part of my job as CEO is to try and be a kind of normalizing and balancing factor.
You mentioned that at the beginning, actually, so you keep coming back to that.
It's important because I think that it's easy to get caught up in things, and I know sometimes I probably have annoyed our employee base by not reacting harder or making a bigger deal to things, or not touting accomplishments and wins in a higher way, but that's like the steadier that we can be around what are our fundamental business metrics, how do we go and prioritize our resources against doing that and continuing to build the business and just kind of cut out noise, the more we will increase our chances of success. So I think that and the bigger you get, the harder it is to do that.
That makes sense. So along those same lines, what was the most, or what has been the most challenging moment for you, in the history of LivingSocial?
Oh boy,
that's a tough one.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody's asked me that before. I think it's been. I would put it into a category of things just related to personnel. And there's a bucket of things that go into this, of where people who were great in a certain role, but then you scale and that needs to change.
Right.
They didn't do anything wrong. They just are
Not
different
the right
than what the business needs. To figuring out, how do you if you don't align your costs with your expenses, you're committing business malpractice, and having that be part of things. To realizing that people who you thought would never leave the business, who you have personal relationships with, leave the business, right? Yeah. Those things all kind of are the biggest, in some degree, emotional tax on things, which it tends to be the hardest things from my standpoint. So. Understanding, things that don't work, like, you're disappointed in that. Things that do work, you get excited about that. But fundamentally, you work with people. People don't generally quit their jobs, they quit their bosses, right? People, their interpersonal relationships that they have at the office and their level of investment and ownership and how they feel about things most of the times when I go home and I feel like I'm incredibly lucky with what I get to do every day. Most of the time when I go home and I'm really kind of drained, it tends to be because that's something to do with really caring about the people in the organization and feeling like it's really, really hard.
So you carry that a little bit on your shoulders.
I hope so. I would rather carry it on my shoulders than other people carry it on theirs.
Right. That's really good to hear. I mean, so how do you? I mean, it's not good to hear from your perspective, but you care
it's part of
a
the
lot.
job.
Right. Yeah, you care a lot. And so what are you doing then? So you have had a lot of different people come through, and you're continuing to grow, right? So how do you retain and attract different types of talent as you do this?
Yeah, well, I think it's actually simpler than you might think. Like, why do people want to work somewhere? Well, they want to feel like they're engaged with what they're doing. They want to feel like they can. So they actually like the environment. They want to feel like they can make a difference, and they want to be fairly compensated for it. So if you can focus on those three things, then you'll create an environment where you'll be able to. So how do you improve each of those metrics? You'll create an environment where you retain the right people that you want to retain, and people who are overly focused on one of those three, maybe aren't right for the business.
Okay. So we're going to shift to the future a little bit. Put our future hats on. Where do you see LivingSocial going?
It's a very broad question.
Okay, let's tone it down a little bit. What are the next steps for LivingSocial?
Slightly less broad, but not much less broad.
Okay. What are you doing tomorrow? Or in 2 days?
Question. 2 days, Friday. What is it? That is Friday, right? I don't know. Undoubtedly meetings.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I guess what I'm thinking is like you've now you're in the social commerce space. Where do you see LivingSocial positioned to jump? Like what's the next? You kind of already alluded to it a little bit.
Yeah, look, I think that if you look at our business, what we do is we drive customers for merchants. And it started off just with very, very local small merchants, and it's evolved to, we're a marketing platform to drive customers, for local and national merchants. And I think that a lot of people and that's where we make our money. Right. I mean, it's merchants that ultimately pay us, right? The customer, we collect the customer's credit card, but we're a middleman and we pass that through. And so I think we need to continue, and you'll see us continue to expand, how we can go and drive customers for merchants. And so I think that the more we can do that and the better we can do that, the more valuable we will be for our partners. Right. And so how do we drive that efficiently and with high customer satisfaction?
Because that actually is an area that there was some negative press around, like as far as merchants, like not realizing what they were signing up for and then getting crushed with, you gave them 10,000 orders or something,
Sure.
And they're not ready for that. Is that something you're looking to address, like with those changes? Or?
Yeah. I think that specific example has been addressed.
Right. Okay.
I think you see a lot fewer stories around
that
at this point in time, because we've gotten better at it, right? I mean, that was some of the scaling of not knowing what you didn't know, and some of it was actually, you would have merchants who would tell you, yes, we can support this level of customers, and we got smart at that and basically said, okay, all right, how many tables do you have? How many times do you turn your tables? What % of your customer base do you actually want to come from this marketing campaign? And we would actually start to go and say, no, you can't sell that. You need to only sell this.
Because we will crush you.
Yeah,
with
exactly.
Orders.
So like we've gotten a lot smarter at that. But I think there is if you look at local media, if you look at the categories that TV and radio make most of their money from, they're categories we don't even touch right now. So we're inherently, we're a local advertising business, right? But local TV and radio, car dealerships, the major automakers, real estate, grocery stores. I mean, these are huge, giant categories that we make nominal amounts of money from at this point in time. But yet we have a circulation in Washington, D.C., a couple of multiples bigger than the Washington Post.
Wow.
So
huge opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, there's a disconnect there. And so how do we solve that?
That's interesting you mentioned that. And back in the day, where did you get those? Where did those people advertise? Right, newspapers. Right.
Yeah.
That was who kind of controlled a lot of that flow, and then it turned into places online. There's a few places that have like car dealerships online and things like that. So you're looking at that space and saying, wow, that looks pretty good.
I think it's a little less on. If you look at there's certain categories where in local space, if you look at where the percentage of spend that still goes to offline versus online, that are big categories. Locally, it is real estate. I mean, Zillow. I don't know if people pay attention to Zillow, but Zillow is an ant on an elephant relative to the total real estate spend right now.
Right.
There's a pretty big opportunity in some big categories in local space still.
Interesting. Okay. We're going to open up in 1 second, but before we do that, okay, I'm going to ask one final question. Okay. It's really about everything you've learned at LivingSocial. If you could boil it down, into one piece of advice, what would it be? Like, what would the biggest, like for everyone here, if there's one thing you would take away and say, listen, this is what I say, and this is what would help you the most.
Yeah, it's unless you are building widgets.
I love widgets.
Who doesn't? But we are a people oriented business. And so you have to, this is obvious, but you have to hire great people that fit with your culture. I can't overemphasize that enough. That is a huge, you got to do that, and then you have to be okay with letting people that don't fit go. So the level of productivity by a team member that either isn't carrying their weight or isn't a right fit, how that brings down the productivity of the rest of the crew is not insubstantial. So it's hard, but you have an obligation to your customers, your employees, and your shareholders to do the right thing for the business. So you need to think about, am I consistently hiring the right people, and am I making sure that we have a system where we can let people excel or treat people with dignity that don't excel in that environment.
Great. Thank you so much. Now we're going to open it up. This is the interactive portion. We've got mics roving around. Steve over here on the left has got one. He'll start out. And there's also questions on Twitter. So if you want to tweet a question, you just use the hashtag TCSessionsDC and ask your question there. And I'll start looking at those as well. So you can ask those questions. Actually, our first one is, that's not a question. That's just, they're quoting you instead. Yeah. So we just keep quoting you.
All right.
That's good. Okay, so Steve, you got the mic? You ready? Okay, who's got the first question? There's one right here if you want to jump on over. This is Steve Kahn from the Tech Cocktail team. He's our VP of Business Development.
Suppose, yeah.
Yep, perfect. Go ahead.
Hi, Tim. Hi, Frank. CarrieAnnPowell.com. I'm curious, you talked about, sort of how to treat your team with dignity if they're not fitted for the position and so forth. When you originally started the organization, what was the culture you wanted to have? Did you put any thought to how you wanted, what kind of corporate culture you wanted to foster? And if you did, how has that evolved as the organization has gotten bigger, and what kinds of strategies have you used to keep that, keep it going as you've gotten bigger?
Okay, so how did you build your culture?
Yeah, so I think when we were very, very small, we didn't spend a lot of time actively thinking about it. It sort of just naturally evolved, but when we really started, probably in early 2010, actually I think it was early 2010, when we were really starting to scale, we got some of the half a dozen people from the company into a room, and we consciously had like a day-long, drag-it-out conversation around like, what do we want the values of the company to be? Because we need to write them down. We need to be able to use it as a hiring filter. And we still, they probably should evolve over time, but we still have those as our core values today.
So was there anybody that you looked at as a role model for those, or company-wise or people-wise?
Not really.
Okay.
I mean, we just it seemed to make sense for us.
Okay. We've got a question from Twitter here. Why did LivingSocial stop food orders? I didn't even know that happened.
Yeah, so, I still order a lot of food, but So we had a takeout and delivery product on the consumer side, and then we had a white label product. We still have the white label product. So if you go to, Applebee's, for example, if you go to the Pig DC just down the street here, and you go and you order online, you actually order through us.
Oh.
So we have a white label product, and that basically the KPIs and the metrics that we're seeing were better on that than they were on the consumer side.
Oh, interesting.
We decided to you have a zero-sum game, and so we decided to shift our resources over there.
How many people are using that we don't know about? A lot?
I think Sarah, you may know the exact number. I think we've got around 8,000 restaurants.
Oh, wow.
That are
Okay.
8,000 units that are.
So behind the scenes, LivingSocial is powering a lot of different places.
Yeah.
So it's still happening, I guess, but that people just didn't see it.
It's a white label product.
Right.
It's,
Okay.
think of OpenTable. You can go to OpenTable.com or you can go to a restaurant's website and book
Right.
a reservation there, but they power it. It's kind of that.
That's you. Okay.
That side of things.
So that was from Jess Jacobs. Thanks for that question.
Thank you, Jess.
Okay, next question. Do we have any in the audience? We got a mic. Where's the mic at? Okay.
Hey there, Frank Warner with Morgan Stanley. My question is just about being a disruptor. Do you think of yourself as a disruptor, or what do you think of disruptors? And do you think of yourself continuing that model or that idea in general?
I don't. I think it's somewhat a marketing or CNBC has like their disruptor series, and they do that to try and market. But I don't think of myself at that. I think of myself that wants to build a good, long, sustainable business that drives value for customers, value for employees, and value for shareholders. And I don't care what labels get associated with that because you do that, you'll be successful.
Okay, so along those same lines, what's your personal theme song?
Did that come from Twitter?
Yes, it did. It came from
Wow.
Patrick Duffy. Good question.
Wow.
He's right there.
Interesting.
Yeah. So you're not a disruptor, but what's your theme song? Like, what's going on, like behind the scenes? What's on your phone that you listen to? Let's start there.
All right. So anybody know Elu?
I love Elu. Yeah.
I listen to Elu quite a bit when I'm in
He's a jazz pianist.
He is. He's a rock
jazz pianist.
If you haven't listened to Elu, he's awesome. If you haven't seen him play, you totally
amazing.
should. He's at HR 57 maybe like 4 or 5 times a year.
Yeah.
It's awesome. It is worth every dollar. I don't know. I feel like my personal theme song is more like Baby Beluga because that plays in my house about 19 times a day. So
that makes sense. Okay, so we got a question from the audience. You got the mic. Okay, Steve over there.
I'm Jackie Abbey from North Point Strategy. So looking back over your last 7 years, what's an obvious scaling mistake that you made and that you just, knowing what you know now, you just wish you'd have done differently?
It definitely falls in the hindsight 2020, but we probably, I wish that we had consolidated the DC office more from a product and technology standpoint. I think we have a lot of remote employees, and we to some degree we needed to do that because we needed people to do the work to continue to grow. But there is a lot of you lose a lot on that from a connection to the company standpoint and relationship building, inefficiencies that go and occur. So I think I wish that I had, particularly in the product and technology organization, that we had been able to go and consolidate that even more, which is probably a very boring answer. But.
Okay, I'm going to take one from Twitter. You mentioned, and this is from Matt LeBaron, you mentioned taking advantage of paradigm shift. What do you see as the next shift occurring? So you're going to play futurist again.
Yeah, so I think that two things I spent a little bit of time thinking about. One is if you look at the amount of traffic for any businesses, but small businesses in particular, that comes from a mobile device, or the number of searches, it's generally more than half. It's like 65%. It varies based on category. But if you look at the number of small businesses that have a mobile-enabled site, it's still sub 10%. So you've got a lot of people that are searching and then going to a really, really horrible experience, like something, and we're probably not going to get to it. So somebody should figure that out in a better way than is happening today. The second thing is I would look for inefficiencies. So one of the reasons why we started the business when we did is because we basically said, wow, at some point there's gonna be a lot of people that are trying to get on the Facebook platform and compete for those users. But right now, that's not the case. So there's a big inefficiency. And I actually think on the advertising side on Pinterest right now, that probably exists. So reasonable, not as big as Facebook, but a lot of users there. They just opened up an ad platform where you can do kind of promoted pins. The number of dollars going into that ecosystem relative to the number of people there probably means you can do some really effective customer acquisition, arbitrage of things. So somebody should be trying to go.
Yeah,
and
I've seen some like pin to win kind of things where you're literally collecting.
Yeah, I bet there are a couple of people that spike up and build reasonable sized businesses. The business might not have anything to do with Pinterest themselves, but they take advantage of the fact that it's an inefficient market. There's a lot of traffic, and it's an inefficient market because you don't have the same number there's not bidders that are really bidding against everything right now.
Right. So you heard it here, you guys. If you want to start a company and you've got access to a fire hose, basically.
Yeah, you do
with Pinterest.
It's a smaller fire hose than Facebook,
right? But it's still a couple million users is better than zero.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So, Steve, right here in the front.
How you doing? I'm Josh Shapiro. I run a small business, a DC-based business called beersandcareers.com. And so right now we run in DC, and I actually contacted LivingSocial about 6 months ago. I started the business. I wanted to ask about your price point and when you guys contact businesses back, because obviously if they're too small, you guys are obviously business not very interested. So for me, it's tough to advertise because, as you said, try not to raise capital, try not to get employees, for as long as you possibly can. So that's the predicament I'm in. We actually just expanded and we're going nationwide.
Okay.
So my question is, what's the price point for you guys to contact a business back?
It's a very specific question.
But I think I can give a
broader.
I think that. Our model, we've moved much more to a marketplace model where we feature certain things, and that allows us to go and work with a much broader variety of businesses. So 6 months from now, it was hard for us because we had to go and make sure that it made sense. It was a win for the consumer, a win for the merchant, a win for us. Now we can go and actually kind of change things around a little bit, where we can get you some promotion. You may not get a featured slot in the top of the email and the top of the page, but we can start to go and get a little bit more traffic. So I think that's how the model is moving. So it's a lot easier to work with a broader variety of businesses.
That makes sense. Okay. Do we have another question from the audience? Looks like we got a bunch. So Steve, what's next? Okay.
Hi, Tim. I'm Aaron from SimpleTix.com. I had a question for you about your international experience. Of the countries you've expanded into, which one was like the easiest, and which one was like the biggest pain in the ass?
It's less around culture and work. It's more around how well does the business go. You think the ones where the business is going great are easy, and you think the ones where it's not are hard. So the one thing that I would say is understanding labor laws I put a much larger emphasis on that than I did 3 or 4 years ago. Both in to hire somebody if you're trying to grow and scale a business fast, but like the common practice is to give 6 months notice to your previous employer, like that affects things.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to go and centralize your operations into one place in Europe, so you have employees at some place that don't make sense in your business model, and it's a year-long process to change that business model. That's very hard to absorb as an organization as well. So. But fundamentally, things are going well. You're like, that's great, that's simple. And if they're not, then you feel like it's difficult.
Okay, next question over here.
Hi, my name is Manuel Iglesias. I work for a consulting firm here in DC. And my question is, so you've obviously spoken about how you've had some problems with scaling and how you've had to let go of employees. How do you keep up with morale and make sure that innovation continues in LivingSocial with all of these issues that have been going on?
Yeah, so I think it's once again, part of my role is understanding that, making sure everybody understands that everything is not always an up and to the right thing, and being that stabilizing force. But it's hard. But it's the consistent and constant. We're going to try things. Not everything is going to work. We're going to have to adjust and recalibrate when things don't, and making people remember, we're not as good as people say we are, and we're not as bad as people say we are when there's something negative going on. Mm-hmm. And the pendulum from a press and coverage and perception standpoint is much broader than the reality of a situation normally is. And trying to make sure that your employees understand that as best as you can is I think important in that.
Okay, good question.
Hey, Tim. I'm a Hoya as well. Edward Novicki, investment banking. And I'm wondering, taking a look at Groupon, Groupon's bottom line has suffered significantly from SG&A and marketing expenses. And I'm just wondering, to the extent that you guys are suffering from the same problems, how do you ramp up revenues and keep the bottom line profitable?
I guess there's a couple of questions. I guess it depends on what you mean by suffering from marketing and SG&A. I mean, those are the two areas where you would look at investment, and you spend marketing because you think that you will go and get a return on your ad spend, and you invest in SG&A because you want to go and build new revenue lines. So. Fundamentally, I guess it's a question of prioritization. How do you spend your dollars to go and drive revenue? And it's more of a question of short term versus long term in my mind. I could go and shift our resources and shift our marketing dollars to really go and drive our revenue in the next 30 or 60 days or 90 days or what have you. But that may not be where we need to be 6 months from now. So I think that is a lot of the prioritization question that I go on when I think of how do we grow revenue in our business, and how do we use our dollars. Your capital is a very, very precious commodity because it's what lets you continue to grow your business. Right. And so I think about it more like that.
So in that same regard, same kind of flow as far as looking ahead, I didn't ask this question when I was talking about future, but I feel like it could be a gorilla in the room here. You've seen your competitor Groupon IPO, and is that something in the future? Like, is that something you're still looking at? Yeah, I know there's been rumors about it for a while and everything. So
sure. So I think once again, it's kind of a if you focus on the right things for your business, like how things go and work out. I mean, an IPO is not an end goal, right? It is a moment in time if that's something that happens.
You get to ring a bell, and that's kind of fun. I mean,
yeah, totally. But it's more of a if you think about, I mean, the things that I spend before a board meeting when thinking about is am I driving value for my customers? Am I driving value for am I doing right by my customers, doing right by my employees, and doing right by my shareholders? Right. And like that's the end goal is to do right by all of those three those three variables. And maybe that's an IPO, but maybe there's lots of ways that you can go and do that.
Okay. Next question over here.
Hi, my name is Joy from the DC Night
Hi, Joy.
Owls. Hey, Frank. We're a late evening co-working group for self-starters. And I just wanted to say congratulations, Frank, on your engagement.
Oh.
It was the first time I heard it when you said Wedding Wire.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Now I'm feeling somewhat awkward. Okay, next question. What's the question?
Sorry.
Blushing.
What's the date?
Yes, when?
It's coming up fast, November 24th. We don't mess around.
Wow.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, in less than or more than a month.
Yeah, we're a little crazy.
Very nice. And for you, Tim, I just wanted to say I'm a huge fan of LivingSocial. I think it's way better than Groupon, way better, even in the beginning. And I just wanted to say, what in terms of I guess your day-to-day, like what's like a hot topic for you? Like maybe a headache that you have going into work?
Headaches day to day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I don't operate like that, to be perfectly honest. It's a little bit more of, what are challenges, and like, I guess I think one of the best characteristics of a CEO is like there's always a play, right? It's like people may not see it, but you have the ability to know, like, no, actually we can go and do that, and like, yeah, somebody says you can't do that, well, screw that, we absolutely can go and do that. And I think that you have certain things that are part of my role are things that I don't necessarily enjoy doing. Like, I literally reviewed what our projected healthcare expenditure was for 2014.
That sounds
yesterday.
like a joy. That's
Right?
fun.
And let me tell you, healthcare costs are not stabilizing. That's I guess is
Right.
things like that take me away from focusing on the product and focusing on how we really grow our business are probably the biggest headaches. But things that are related to growing the business are challenges. I think that's and when you feel like something isn't working, you kind of have to tell yourself, you're taking a longer term view, and there's until you don't have any more money as a company, there's always a play. And you may need to be playing high stakes poker. You may need to be incredibly creative in how you do it. But like if you kind of have that mindset and think of it as challenges, then I think you don't actually have headaches as much when you're thinking about growing your business.
Right. You lit up when she asked that question a little bit, because you're like, it seems like that's what you're passionate about, is never giving up and just keeping on.
Yeah, I just think that there is this aspect of if you just keep trying, like, things don't happen overnight. I mean,
Right.
they don't, and so you need to have a little bit of a longer term view, and you need to be okay with knowing that people like this is why I thought Jeff Bezos was a great buyer for the Washington Post, because if you had to say what's going to be a fantastic criteria, it's somebody who has incredibly deep pockets, but somebody who doesn't care what people say about him,
Right.
And somebody who takes a very long-term view. And that's like a fantastic criteria when you're trying to reinvent the news business.
Yep.
And I think that if you can incorporate that into what you do in a day in, day out basis, like, of course you have short-term metrics and KPIs that you have to do, but then it's just all about problem solving and convincing the people that you work with that you can actually go solve those problems. So it's not headaches. It's just challenges.
Yeah.
And just remembering that there's always another play. And that's I think one of the most important things that if you're running a company to keep in mind.
Are you a sports fan?
I am.
What sports?
All
Sports. So you don't. Okay. What are your teams?
I tend to be Twins and Vikings.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
Caps for hockey.
Yeah. Nice.
Georgetown basketball. No comment.
Okay. A few more questions.
Greg Monroe's there now.
How are you feeling? First off, we've been grilling you here for a while in the lights. How you doing?
Yeah,
Hanging in there?
I'm great.
There's
Another bottle here.
Okay.
So.
We've got a few more questions, and then we'll wrap it up. So, right here.
Hi, Tim. I'm Catherine.
Hello, Catherine.
Go Packers.
Catherine works at LivingSocial.
I do.
So
I work at LivingSocial. I have sort of a broader question of LivingSocial in terms of being a tech company. What role do you see LivingSocial playing in that tech community in DC? What would you like to see personally in terms of the DC tech industry and community, and where it should be going, or where you'd like to see it go, and how do you think it's going to get there?
Good question.
DC tech community.
So I think how I have thought about it is, and this is probably the sixth time I will said this phrase, so I apologize. But when I viewed what's LivingSocial's what does it first have a responsibility to, and what do I first have a responsibility to? It's my business, right? It is a how do I, customers, shareholders, employees, right? And then if I feel like I got that right, then it's how do you grow that ecosystem around there? I think when we feel like we have that right, then I feel like what LivingSocial should do in the tech community should expand hugely. But until we have that right, we need to make sure that we're doing right by our customers, employees, and shareholders. And so I think that's kind of how I view that, and that might be an unpopular perspective.
So you have a hierarchy almost that you check. It's like check off.
Well,
right?
it's just it's a you have to know where. I'd put it less formally than that,
Right.
but you have to know where your obligations are.
Right.
And that's where our obligations have to be as a primary objective. But I think when we feel like that primary objective is in a really good spot, which I haven't felt like yet, then I feel like we can do a lot more than what we're doing now. And we do try and do some things as an organization, whether it's hosting events, whether it's participating in things. But I think we can do more. But we need to have that feel good about that first stage. And then the DC tech community on the whole. I mean, I think there is an infrastructure. I mean, we're sitting in part of it right now at this point. You've had a mayor's office that's been more proactive on that front. So there have been pieces. For the most part, people aren't moving away, but small ding. But so that infrastructure I think exists. I think a big thing that's missing, that's a very, very hard one, is and this is no knock on any of them, but there is not a real major comp sci program in any of the universities around here.
Right.
And I actually think some of the for-profit schools should come in and just own this area because the getting a new school, et cetera, endowed is
What about Virginia Tech? I mean, they're not that far away.
Yeah, it's 4 hours though.
It's a long way.
And University of Maryland has
Right.
has a decent math and comp sci program. So it's not that there's nothing, but I do think if you look at the that's a piece of infrastructure that doesn't exist in the way that it does in other major tech hubs, and I think DC will struggle to truly become one until that piece of infrastructure is fixed.
Interesting. There's always a question of capital too. So I want to ask you, because you've taken a little bit of money off the table here with LivingSocial, and I've heard rumors for years about, LivingSocial is the savior. It's not even rumors. It's people literally saying that you're the savior because you're going to cash out and then you're going to invest all this money into all these startups. So I've got you here. Is that going to happen, or what's going on with that?
I mean, I think there is, if the idea and the traction is strong enough, there's money available in the area. I mean, even the Revolution guys have a $150 million smaller stage fund, and then I think a $500 million larger stage fund that they basically said, look, our preference is DC area companies. So there is capital there. You get new market. I mean, AngelList is a new type of marketplace. I mean, capital is hard. It's hard. Capital is there. It's hard to convince somebody to give it to you. But the number of methods where it's increased has happened pretty substantially over the last couple of years.
I'm going to ask a funding question then. So on the web or on the Twitter, question about best way to go about determining when you need funding and who to go to. So you mentioned who to go to. When do you know?
When you feel like your core business objective cannot be accomplished unless you have more cash in the bank.
Okay, pretty straightforward. We're going to ask a couple more questions, and then we're going to send you on your way, because I know you've got probably other things you've got to get back to. So really appreciate your time, though. Totally. We've got a couple more here. Dave Meyer.
Go ahead, Dave.
Okay, we got one over here? Okay. Let's do 2 more questions, and then you're out of the hot seat.
All right. Then I turn the tables.
Are we good? You hear me?
So, Tim, I just want to say we're actually celebrating our 1 month anniversary working at LivingSocial.
Wow.
So this is a good
Wow.
way to celebrate.
Welcome.
But I also have to say I am the biggest Giants fan, so I will not be a fan of you on Monday because you're a Vikings fan. But the real question is coming from Andy.
Okay, so I'm a marketing specialist for you, but I'm also really interested in the startup space, and I'm wondering where you stopped in like differentiating yourself and start following like other things that actually work. I'm not gonna like touch on the 4-letter G word, but like in terms of revenue share and things like that, like where are you gonna start differentiating yourself in the future, and what is that gonna look like?
So I think on the first part of the Giants-Vikings, I think the teams are a combined 1-9. So like, if anybody watches that game, I'll be surprised. But because it's a New York-based team, it'll get lots of coverage. And then on kind of differentiation, I think you need to look at what is going around in your space, and if somebody's doing something that works, like you need to figure out, does that apply to my business or not? The first gas station that had the automated card pump machine. When their competitor down the street started doing that, or when the competitor down the street saw that happen, they're like, hey, that seems like a good idea. I should do that. That applies to my business, right? Is that a bad thing? No. So I think you have to look at what things out there apply to your business and make your business stronger. And then I think you need to look at, what are the areas where we can build up a competitive moat, and how do we invest and prioritize to go and actually build that moat. So you always look for points of differentiation. But you can't be ignorant to things in the competitive marketplace that can help your business.
Does that answer it? Yeah. Okay. Go Bears. Who's next? Last question. We got it right here.
Thanks for the opportunity, Tim. You mentioned about the Zillow being an ant on an elephant in the real estate space.
Uh-huh.
And you also mentioned about the differentiating factor. What's happening in the real estate information display, that's the market space they are in, what is missing in that space for any one single player to be large enough? Or what is that you see as a gap in that market space?
I guess two things, if you want me to opine on the real estate industry. One is, I think Zillow frankly doesn't have enough traffic. So if they were bigger overall, a larger share of dollars would go there. But the actual ad spend and efficiency of that ad spend, Zillow charges a lot. They can't actually go that much higher in dollar value because the ROI for the people who are spending it, is gonna decrease. Mm-hmm. So I think that's one. If somebody could get more traffic, that would be one. The second is I personally think that how the fee-based system of real estate works right now somebody will figure out something very, very differently in that, if you sell a house for $100,000 worth or $1 million, it doesn't matter, if the price is more or less, doesn't matter if you spend 10 hours or 100 hours in doing it, you end up just paying a percentage of the sale. And in a world where there's so much more transparency that occurs, I think if you can figure out a way to go and solve that, that's a pretty big space.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. I think we're going to wrap it up at that. You've been a great interview here, and thank you all for the questions. Let's hear it for Tim O'Shaughnessy.
Thank you.